All right, hello again. This is Brandon Clayton, the Algebra Guy. Today, as you see on your screen, we will be discussing naming and writing decimals step by step. So, how do you name and write a decimal? Here are the questions that we want to answer in our lesson for today. What is a decimal? What is decimal notation and why is it important? How do we correctly name a decimal? Given its name, how do we correctly write a decimal, and how to convert a decimal to a mixed number of fractions? So we're gonna got a bit to cover today, so hope you're ready to jump into it. All right, let's get going. So let's start out first with an example to remind you that you're already very familiar with decimals, because if you went to the store and let's say this sandwich was $3.25 and you bought another water for let's say $1, we'll just say $1, and they added let's say tax on it, so they charge you tax. Let's say it was 33 cents. So if they charge you this, you would know how to intuitively add all this up without any problem. So you're used to this, and what you've done is you've lined up the decimals, and you're just going to add up the corresponding places, the similar place values. So in this case, it's 5 and 3 would give me an 8, 2 and 3 give me a 5, 3 and 1 would give me a 4. So I would know the price is $4.58 for everything. So you're already familiar with decimals. We deal with it. You see it at the gas station, so much per gallon. So this is not a new phenomenon. So what is decimal notation? Writing a number with a decimal is known as decimal notation. It's a way of showing parts of a whole when the whole is a part of 10. And we're going to talk about this power of 10 piece in just a second, but it's kind of like fractions. When we talked about fractions, we had 2/3. This is a way of showing some part of the whole thing, 2/3 of the whole piece. Decimals are another way of showing parts of a whole, but now we're looking in powers of 10. In other words, decimals are another way of writing fractions whose denominators are powers of 10. So what is meant by that? So if you look at this chart here, you see counting numbers on the left and naming on the right. So in this case, this is 1, obviously. This is 10. 100 is the same thing as 10 times 10. 1,000 is 10 times 10 times 10. And 10,000 is 10 times 10 times 10 times 10. As you can see, they're all powers of 10, which means that you're really just multiplying by 10. If you could argue that this one's times 10 as well, but it's times 10 to the 0 power, because that's just going to equal 1. So that's 1 times 1, which is the same thing. But these are all powers of 10. And that's one part of decimals, because you're looking on the left side of a decimal. Because on the left side of a decimal is this side over here. You have, your 1. You have your 10. You have your 1,000 and so forth. But what about the other side of a decimal, which is that right side? So here you go here. These are also, if you look closely, powers of 10. So this is 1/10. So you divide that 1 by 10. You divide this 1 by 100. That's 10 times 10. Divide this 1 by 1,000. That's 10 times 10 times 10. And 10,000, which is 4 tens multiplied by each other, as we mentioned. Now, I also want you to take note, and I'm going to mention this here in a second, that though the names are similar, they are different. So these are tens, and these are tenths. So on the right side, we have with this little th, as opposed to the left side that just says hundred. It says hundredths. That's telling you that it's a fraction, and shown on the right side of that decimal. Now, notice two important factors. One, I just pointed out to you that the th at the end of the name means the number is a fraction. So this th is a number of fraction. 1,000 is a number larger than 1, but 1,000th is a number smaller than 1. 1,000th, that means you take $1 and divide it into 1,000 little pieces. And how much is one of those pieces worth? So that's really tiny. As opposed to having $1,000, these are not equal. But in fact, showing this sentence, this is greater. 1,000 is greater. So definitely don't miss that point as we talk about decimals. The tenths place is the first place to the right. The tenths place right here. So let's look at this model. Think of this box is being filled in with numbers. The first place right here is the tenths place to the right of the decimal, but the tens place is two places over here. So the tens is 2 places from the decimal, while the tenths is the first one. So don't get those confused thinking they're in the same spot. Like they're both 2 places or they're both 1 place. They have different places there. So let's try naming this. So let's start by actually practicing. How do you name this? So you can say 17.86. But I want you to use the correct terminology here. So how would I write this? Here's my decimal. So I know there's going to be a 7 here, a 1 here, and an 86. How would you say that number? Uh-oh, they want to erase that. But how would you say that? That's what we're going to practice today. The way you want to say this, let me pull my slide back up. The way you want to say this is where the decimal ends. So there's a 6 right there in the end. And we're going to call this 17 and 86 hundredths. And that's how we're going to do it. So we're going to do some more practice and get into how to name those. But let's name the number to the left of the decimal point, which is what we just did. Right and for the decimal point. So we're going to go back here and just do what I just did. So 17, name the numbers. This is 17 to the left of the decimal point. Right and for the decimal point. So we're going to write and. This is going to be our and again. And then name the number part to the right of the decimal point as if it were a whole number. So let's name this whole thing as if it were a whole number. Don't say 86, but we can just say 86. And name the decimal place of the last digit. So the decimal place of this last digit we just talked about was hundredths. So that's going to be 17 and 86 hundredths. All right, let's continue our practice with these. How do you name this here? Instead of saying 4.3, we want to name it using the correct tenths and hundredths. So we're going to have 4 and a 3 here. And we name the number on the left just by naming it 4. And then the whole thing on the right, oh, I'm sorry, let's do and. This is going to be and 3. And then we're going to name this piece tenths. So this would be 4. So A will be 4 and 3 tenths with an H on the end. Tenths. And what about B? So how would I name B? Let's erase what we do have here. And B is written as 2.45, 2.45. So we're going to name this 2 and 45. So we name that whole thing. I'm just going to almost just wrote it 45. And we name that place is hundredths is where it ends. So we name it 45 hundredths. Hundredths. I do not believe I spelled that right. Oh, that looks good, actually. Hundredths. And what about C? So let's erase and do C. How would you name C? I would try to name it out loud before I do it and see if you get it right, or write it down. This is going to be 0 and 2 zeros, then our 9. How do you name that number? So we first named the number to the left of the decimal, which is 0. So do we say 0 and? In this case, if you have nothing there, you can just say nothing. You don't have to say 0 and. You just call it by the number that's on the right. In this case, it's just 9. So it's going to be 9. And then we call that place out thousands. Thousands. And lastly, D. I bet you can name that one. I would try if you haven't tried that one already. So D says we got a negative 15. Negative 15. Notice I kept the negative in the 10. I don't want it to be in the hundreds. And 571 after the decimal. 571. How do you name this? Well, we're going to do our whole number on the left first, called negative 15. And our decimal is going to be and then 571 thousandths. 571 thousandths. Now you could have just said no, you got to say it that way, 571 thousandths. And that's just the best way to say it. So hopefully that gives you an idea of how to name the decimals. Now, how do you write decimals? What if I gave you this time the word, but you write it? How would you write this? So the word "and" tells us to place a decimal. I bet you could do this one. 6 and 1700. So we got 6 and 17 hundredths. The word before "and" is the whole number. Write it to the left, which is what we did. 6. The decimal part, we put 17, and we end up with this. Now, I'm curious, what do you think if they would have said 17 thousandths? How do you think our answer would have changed, or would have changed? Thousandths. How would our answer change then? Well, it's something interesting. This happens a lot in science. If they've actually measured to the thousands, they'll go ahead and put a 0 here to show that they've actually measured it that far. So it could have been a 1 or 2, but they measured it at 0, and they want you to know we've measured it all the way to the thousands, whether it be volume or distance or whatever it is. So this is how that will look. Same number, we just add the 0 to say we're counting this spot too. Now, on the left side of the 0, it doesn't matter how many zeros you put. It's still going to be the exact same number. But on the right side, it tells you it's still the same number, but they've actually measured it up to that number. All right, so continuing writing decimals. We just did that. These are the steps of doing so. Look for the word "and," mark the number of decimal places you need to the right. Translate the word after "and" into the number and fill in the 0 places as needed. And we just kind of did that a second ago as far as filling in decimal places as needed. So write as a decimal 5 and 894 thousandths. Wow. I would encourage you to pause it here and try to write that and think of what that looks like before I do it. So we got a 5, and then the "and" tells us it's a decimal. 894, I know how to write that, 894 thousandths. So am I in the thousands? Let's see. We got tenths, hundredths, thousands. So yeah, I don't have to add any zeros because it stopped right there at the thousand. So this is our number. What about this one, right? 14 and 37 hundredths. So that should be pretty easy, right? 14 and is a decimal, 37 hundredths. So this is a tenths, that's the hundredths. So we're good, 37 hundredths. Now again, if they would have said thousandths or 10 thousandths, we would have added zeros to make sure it ends on that correct place. 24 thousandths as a decimal, 24 thousandths. So don't do that. That's 24,000. We got TH on the end, so we're not going to do that. Thousandths ends. Let's count our places so we'll know where to stop the 4 at. So this is tenths, hundredths, and thousandths is where we want to be. So we got 24,000. So we know it's going to be a 24 here, and in the tenths place must be a 0. This is where that 0 acts as a placeholder to help us understand that we're actually going to the 0.024. So this is a kind of a placeholder to make sure we get to the thousands that we were looking for. All right, how do you convert a decimal to a fraction or a mixed number? So you'll find this pretty intuitive, I hope. But you look at the number to the left of the decimal. If it's a 0, you know what? It's better if I just work it. I think it makes more sense then. So write each of the following decimal numbers as a fraction or a mixed number. So we want it as a fraction. Now I want to go from a decimal to a fraction. So first, I'm going to look at the number to the left of the decimal. If it's a 0, it's going to be a proper fraction. If it's not a 0, the decimal converts to a mixed number. So let's start with this one. Write the whole number if it's not a 0. So it's just 4. So I'm going to convert it to a mixed number, looks like. And then determine the place value of the final digit. It's that's the tenths, hundredths actually. That's the hundredths. And then write the fraction. So hundredths of a fraction is like that. Numerated, the numbers to the right of the decimal point. So those are going to be 0, 9. In this case, we just write 9 hundredths. And the denominator place corresponding to the final digit, which is a hundredths. So now I can simplify this if I can, but I can't because there's no common factors 9 and 100 having common other than 1. So that's how we keep it. There is a mixed number for you there. What about this next one? How do I convert this to a fraction? Well, again, I have a whole number, so I can just write that down. It's going to be a mixed number. Then I got 7 in the tenths place, 7 tenths, and there's my mixed number. And I can't simplify that anymore, so I'm leaving it just like that. And 0.286, negative 0.286, how do you write that? If there's a number there, you write it, but we don't. So this is just going to be a fraction. And this last number goes all the way to the thousandths. So when I write this fraction, I'm going to go ahead and put 1,000 and put this whole number on top, 286 thousandths. Now, I know I can simplify this by at least 2 because they're both even, so I'm going to start there. So I know I can divide that by 2. 286 divided by 2, looks like it's going to be 143. And that's over half of 1,000, which is 500. And I don't suspect that these are any more divisible. If they are, then you could take care of that another time. But you get the idea that we do need to simplify as much as you possibly can. And that's how you would handle it if it were no 0 in front. You'll still take this last piece all the way to the thousandths, tenths, whatever place that is. All right, did we answer all our questions? You better believe we did. We always do. What is decimal notation and why is it important? It's important, as you see, because we use it quite a bit, especially with money. And the decimal notation is the number that has a decimal in it. How do we correctly name a decimal? Well, you just name the number in front. And instead of the decimal, you're going to say and continue naming that number after that with its correct place name. So like tenths, hundredths, and thousands and whatnot. Given its name, how do we correctly write a decimal? We learned how to do that. That was probably easier than creating a decimal. And how do you convert a decimal to a mixed number? So you just look at, let's say 3.56. You look at the whole number, 3 and 56 in what place? What's the last number is in the place of 100? So before I simplify, it's going to be like that. But I know I can simplify more to 14 over 50. 7 over 25. Yeah, it looks like the smallest. 7 over 3 and 7/25. If I divide both by 8. Yep. Should be 4. No, this should be, that can't be right. Because 100 divided by 8 is not 25. So now I kind of want to work that one. 56, half of 56 is 28, and half of 100 is 50, and half of 28 is 17, and 25, and that's where we stop. So it's going to be 3 and 17/25. All right, guys, thanks for tuning in. I hope you found that helpful. My name is Brandon Clayton, the Algebra Guy, and I'll see you next lesson.